All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual event space. My name is Allie. You might recognize me from our Lake Forest Park location. I'm your host for this evening, and I'm so excited to be introducing Tara Moss and Fiona Davis here to discuss the next book in Tara's Billie Walker series, The Ghost of Paris. But before we get into the good stuff, on behalf of all of us here at Third Place Books, I just want to quickly thank you all so much for tuning in. For all of you who may not know, we are an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area. We're having more and more of our events in person, which is very exciting, but our online program is sticking around to connect readers and authors in a virtual space. So thank you all so much for tuning in and buying books. Your support is what makes all of this possible. If you haven't gotten your hands on any of the books that come up this evening and you would like to, I will be linking books in chat. For those of you in the Seattle area, come on in, grab a copy off the shelf, or you can place an order online and pick them up in the store. Or if you're not local or not leaving the house, we of course do ship. So go ahead and follow those links in chat over to our website. While you're on our website, I definitely encourage you to check out some of our other upcoming events. We have an exciting roster coming up this spring and summer. So if you'd like to stay in touch with our community, you can go ahead and sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly update about events, exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books, pretty much everywhere for the quickest updates and recommendations. And, we do have a pretty good time over on our social media, so definitely go check it out if you haven't already. So tonight we are here for about an hour, and towards the end we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen. It is different than the chat box, which I'm seeing people have discovered. Hello, Susie and Maria, welcome. I absolutely invite you to continue using the chat to connect with each other and applaud virtually. But when it comes time for questions, do make sure those end up in the Q&A so we can most easily find them. So while you're in our chat and question spaces, I do want to remind you to please lead with kindness and refrain from any inappropriate behavior or harassment. And finally, should any technical issues arise, we will work as quickly as we can to resolve them, and we appreciate so much your patience and understanding. All right, so now it's time to settle in and get cozy, because without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome internationally best-selling author, human rights activist, documentary and podcast host, and model Tara Moss. Her crime novels have been published in 19 countries and 13 languages, and her memoir, The Fictional Woman, was a #1 international bestseller. She's a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador and has received the Edna Ryan Award for significant contributions to feminist debate and for speaking out on behalf of women and children. She is recognized as one of the global top 50 diversity figures in public life in 2017. And in 2021, she reported, wrote, and hosted the true crime podcast, The Man in the Balaclava, which is so good. In conversation this evening, I'm so pleased to introduce Fiona Davis, New York Times bestselling author of The Dollhouse, The Address, The Masterpiece, The Chelsea Girls, The Lions of Fifth Avenue, and most recently, the instant New York Times bestseller, The Magnolia Palace, which Lisa Wingate called a beguiling story that unfolds like a clever game of Clue. So the book this evening, I'm going to not give any spoilers for. It's called The Ghost of Paris. It's the highly anticipated second book in the Billie Walker series, the sequel to international bestseller, The War Widow. So thank you all so much for being here. Audience members, do not be shy in chat if you need anything. And with that, I'm going to pass the stage to our authors. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here tonight with Tara. And I see there's already some very familiar faces and names in the chat. Thank you guys for joining us. If you don't know about this series or don't know about Tara's books, you are in for such a treat tonight. So welcome. Hi, Tara.
Hi, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Ellie. And Thank you, Third Place Books, for your support and everyone who showed up tonight. This is so exciting. The US launch of The Ghosts of Paris. Thank you, Fiona, for being here as part of this event. I'm a huge fan of yours, so I'm just fangirling over here, frankly,
Right
Fiona.
back
I
at
love
you,
your work.
actually. Yeah. So I just have to share, I love this book so much. I like the first book in the series as well. Book list called The Ghosts of Paris. It has the romance of Paris, the adrenaline rush of a deadly chase, a soul-shattering secret, and a resilient heroine make for a gripping read. Now that sums it up really nicely. And I think what both of us are really drawn to are very strong women. And so just to start out, for someone who doesn't know about this series, can you tell us a little bit about the series and then kind of go into about what The Ghosts of Paris is about?
Sure, thank you. I'm going to start by doing a very quick description, a visual description in aid of accessibility, and because it's kind of fun as well. So obviously, I'm Tara Moss. I'm wearing a red 1940s style dress with a 1940s victory pin from World War II. I have long salt and pepper hair. I'm against a gold vintage screen, and I'm holding The Ghosts of Paris. We've got the wonderful Ida von Munster on the cover. This is the second time I've managed to get her as a model for Billie Walker. And what's really cool about her is she's not just the model there on the cover. She is very into 1940s style. She knows her stuff. She's an aficionado, and she takes the photographs, styles herself, and does the whole thing all on her own. So she is a really kick-butt woman and a great Billie Walker. The Ghost of Paris starts off with, it kind of takes us back to the agency that we became familiar with in The War Widow. So with The War Widow, we've got Billie Walker, who's a former war reporter during World War II, one of those amazing women like, Martha Gellhorn or Lee Miller, who did incredible work during the war. And once that post-war period kicks in, there's the pressure for women to get back in the kitchen very much. Thank you very much. Thanks for your efforts during the war. Get back in the kitchen. But she was never that kind of woman. In fact, what she's done is gone back to Australia and reopened her late father's private investigation agency. So in The War Widow, we see her really getting the agency off the ground, getting involved in a case that turns out to be a lot more complicated than she thought, and gets her tangled up with a network of Nazi war criminals. With The Ghosts of Paris, we see her back at that agency with those events having taken place about 6 months on from the events in The War Widow. And there's still that mystery hanging over Billie's head, the personal mystery of what happened to her husband, Jack Rake. And there are many women who lost their husbands during the war. There were lots of people who were displaced and went missing, over millions of people during that period. And her husband's only one of them. And as her job requires her to find missing husbands and cheating husbands, the great irony, of course, is that she hasn't been able to find her own. And when a wealthy client comes into her office and dangles the carrot, if you will, of, going back to Paris and London to find her own husband, well, then Billie can, no longer keep that personal mystery on the back burner. Suddenly she has to face that actually she has things she needs to resolve herself. And so The Ghosts of Paris is really taking her face to face with the ghosts of what happened for her during the war in Europe.
And it's she's such a complicated character. I love Billie Walker so much. What inspired you? I think this is your 14th book, is that right?
Yes.
And so doing this historical fiction was kind of a new tact for you. How did that come about, and what inspired you to write this series?
Thank you, Fiona. It's actually strange that I didn't write historical fiction prior to this, because I've been obsessed with history my whole life. I've been obsessed particularly with the 1940s, and I grew up on stories of the 1940s from my Oma and Opa in particular. I think all of us, everybody out there tonight watching this launch, will have some connection with the period, whether it's very strong or whether there's a lot that they don't know about what their family went through. Everyone in the world was impacted by World War II. And so we're still living in a way in the aftermath of it, even 80 years on. That's certainly the case for me. And growing up on the stories of Cornelia in Tunis, my Oma and Opa, who survived Nazi-occupied Holland during World War II was what got me interested as a kid. You know, hearing these stories when they did tell them, which was, it was sometimes hard to get them to talk about the war. But my opa was taken by the Nazis and put into slave labor during the occupation. A lot of their neighbors who were Jewish went to a different camp, and they, you know, didn't see them again. My opa was taken to a munitions factory in Berlin, and my oma, who had young children at the time, used to smuggle flour and sugar in the hollows of her bicycle and cycle across Holland all the way to Berlin. And she would smuggle those ingredients to her husband. And he had been a baker by trade. So he used those ingredients to bake bread in the munitions ovens. And he used that to bribe the foreman. And that's how he got a day pass that allowed him to escape slave labor with the Nazis during World War II. So it's stories like that. I mean, I'm fascinated by all aspects of that period, you know, the material culture, film noir, hard-boiled, you know, love the women of film noir. You can tell when you read the books that I'm a big fan, but it is really the stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things that motivates me personally as a writer. And writing this series has just been such a joy because I feel like I've had it in me for a long time.
And Billie is such a fascinating woman. She's tough, she's vulnerable, she's so brave, she's ingenious, you know, she's such a heroine, and she's so noir as well. And you do fill in, you know, the clothes and the jewelry. You just feel like you're in a noir movie as you read it. And can you tell me where she sprung from? And I love the fact that she insists everyone call her Ms., which was not, I can't imagine it was widely done back then. Can you tell us a little about her and about where she came from?
Yeah, so Billie Walker really sprung quite fully formed from my imagination after, you know, being inspired by these women for such a long period of time. So she's, you know, one part Nancy Wake, the incredible Australian woman, New Zealand born actually, and became quite famous in Australia as well, who's one of the most celebrated and awarded wartime heroes who are women. She used to get dropped into, you know, war zones, and she always had her fighting red lipstick with her, although I don't know what she called it. Fighting red is actually the name of a tussie shade, which was a real shade during World War II. So Billie Walker always wears her fighting red. I wear my fighting red in kind of homage to that. But Nancy Wake would get, you know, dropped into these conflict zones with a satin pillow and her lipstick. And, you know, probably no other frills, nothing else that she could have with her, but she'd be dropped down in a parachute, and she had those essentials with her. And she could apparently, you know, seduce or talk someone out of, you know, anything, and killed Nazis with her bare hands. She was an extraordinary woman. So it was stories like that. And I thought, what, you know, who is it that I want to write? Well, she just arrived and told me who she was. There was a description by readers of her when The War Widow came out as a fast-talking, fast-driving, champagne-swilling Nazi hunter investigator. And it was like, yeah, you know, that's the girl gang I want to be part of. She was absolutely someone I want to go and have a champagne cocktail with, right? So she arrived quite fully formed, and she is one of those hard-boiled dames, but she's also subverting the genre, because as much as I love hard-boiled and noir, women tended not to come up very well. They were usually the victim, either at the beginning or the end, and they weren't really the ones who pushed the plot along, except maybe by their own death. In this case, Billie is a woman of action. She is the man for the job, so to speak. And when people come to her agency, she gets things done. And I wanted to write about that and articulate that part of real history. There were private investigators who were women in the 1940s, and honestly, we have not seen much of them at all. The contemporary literature at the time was pretty much completely devoid of female PIs and dominated by the Philip Marlowes and Sam Spade types. So what I'm doing it's not that it's not authentic, it's just another perspective on what was actually happening at the time, and hopefully cutting the boring stuff out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's wonderful. And I love the fact she has this assistant and everyone, there's this
Mm,
common thing of every time they show up somewhere, everyone thinks that he's the boss. And she has to
of
very
course.
carefully correct them that nope, she's the one in charge, as she is.
That's right. And she still gets mail that's addressed to, Mr. Mr. Walker when she's so obviously Mrs. or Ms. And I didn't answer the Ms. part. So Billie is in this awkward position in the 40s where she has married a man, but and she loves him, but he's gone missing. Years have passed, and she's doesn't even have a wedding ring. She doesn't really know what her own marital status is, and neither do the people around her. And that was a very tricky position to be in socially at the time. So already she's in an occupation that's dominated by men. There's pressure for her to, leave all paying jobs to the returning soldiers, but she needs her bread and butter money too, like anyone else. And at the same time, she a war widow? What's happened? He's assumed dead. So she takes on that title of Ms. rather than Mrs. or Miss. It did exist as a more neutral honorific in the late 1800s, but wasn't very much used. And when she read about it in the New York Times, she thought, actually, I think that might solve my problem, because she didn't want to be called Miss,
Yeah.
not after a wedding, not after all she'd been through. And every time she's called Mrs., it touches on her grief. So she finds this middle line of Ms. Walker.
I think that's brilliant. She's a woman ahead of her time.
Very much.
And one of the things that you do so well is you draw attention to so many issues that were a problem back then and are still going on today, like the treatment of Aboriginal communities, women as second-class citizens. And then you come up with these injustices that are so surprising that in the 1940s, Australian women police weren't allowed to carry weapons and weren't given uniforms. And as well as that, when Billie goes to France, she learns that it's illegal for a woman to wear trousers in Paris without a police permit.
True story. That particular law came up after the French Revolution, and it was firmly in place. Imagine having a war that's just torn people's lives apart, and you care whether a woman is wearing trousers or a skirt. I mean, extraordinary. But there's this real pressure on women to kind of, what is your role? What does it mean to be a woman? And that idea of femininity, it's very fraught during the 40s with all that social change. It's one of the reasons I wanted to set my books in this period, because it does tell us so much about how far we've come, but also how many things haven't changed.
Yeah.
And it gives us part of the history that has led us to where we are today. So the treatment of people who are disabled, like her returned war vet assistant, Sam, now can't get a job. Thankfully, as she puts it, he's happy to take orders from a woman, which is far too rare a trait, as she remarks. He's a wonderful companion to her and her work. And maybe he wouldn't have been working for her if things had been a bit more equal at the time. And think of how many people came back with their lives changed in those sorts of issues. So there are so many things to remark upon that really echo problems that still exist today and make us think on it, And I think that's one of the great things about this genre, that crime fiction or historical fiction or this crossover allows us to look at social justice issues in a way that's, it's not a lecture. You shouldn't even be aware that you're absorbing it. It's just fascinating. You go, what? It was illegal to wear pants? What? She's going to get kicked out of the lobby of the Paris Ritz. It was so subversive for Marlene Dietrich to be getting out there with trousers. You just don't realize how much of an issue it was until, you touch on it in fiction, and then it's eye-opening and wonderful as an author to come across these little tidbits.
And what you do so well is you bring up these issues, but you're not hammering it home. It doesn't feel like you're in the present commenting on the past. As a reader, you are fully nested in the 1940s. What kind of historical research do you do to get that level of depth?
I go down the rabbit hole, Fiona. I think you do the same.
Yeah.
I think that's the plight of the historical fiction writer, is we go down the rabbit hole of research, and I over research, whatever that means. There's maybe 5% that will end up in the book. And some of that gets cut, in later drafts because I still have too much in it. There's just so much fascinating detail, and you don't want it to slow the plot. You want the action and the characters to pull you through. But those little juicy bits of the past are too beautiful to give up. So they just have to sit there in context. So your characters have to navigate those obstacles. And there's so many examples of that in The War Widow and The Ghosts of Paris. You brought up the police in Australia. The women weren't allowed to have a pension. They weren't given, they were actually signing documents saying that they wouldn't get any compensation if they were injured in the line of duty. And despite all of this, very sexist, I mean, it was completely sex-based, gender-based discrimination. Despite that, people were knocking down the door trying to get jobs because women wanted this, they were detectives in waiting, they were policewomen in waiting, and they weren't getting the opportunities. So it's quite amazing to me what women had to navigate and how extraordinary their achievements are. Like D-Day was, the anniversary of D-Day was recently, it was a few days ago, and Martha Gellhorn, for example, an incredible war reporter from the time. I don't know how many people listening right now realize she was the only woman to land on the beaches at D-Day and to cover that landing firsthand. She'd been knocked back because she was a woman, so she stowed away. And she stowed away, and she was like, she'd arrived in like the kitchen of some ship, and that's how she stowed away and managed to be there on the front lines. So women had to really work that little bit harder against the authorities in order to do their jobs, and then did those jobs extraordinarily well.
Oh, isn't that incredible? And also what you do, I think, so well is describing clothes as you're reading it. She's a wonderful dresser, and so you really feel like you can see what she's wearing. And do you do a deep dive for that? Because that's one of the fun things I love about historical research, is finding what they're going to be wearing.
Well, it's an important part of, I think, setting things in a particular time. If you omit dress, you're leaving out a big part of the social context of people's lives. But she's also a private inquiry agent, and there is form also in the noir and hard-boiled genres. When you look at a character, say like Philip Marlowe, a character, who really set the scene for hard-boiled, he was incredibly observant, and there are amazing descriptions of people's clothes in those hard-boiled books.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because it's revealing. We learn a lot about a character by the state of their shoes, by the cut of their suit. We learn about their social status and their financial situation, but we also learn about what impression they're trying to make, or who they think they are, and whether that fits with who they actually are. So it is not superficial. It goes really to the root of people's human experiences. How, make, do, and mend. How did people survive that period when women were wearing suits? Often the skirt suits were made at home using fabric from their missing soldier husband's suits that were in the closet, and they've tailored them to fit them because they got so few rationing coupons of fabric available that's what they have, that's what they can do. So the resilience and what you can see in the cut and the cuff and the thread is really so much more than just a superficial image. It's not just what you see in the fashion magazines, I guess is what I mean to say. You've really got to look at what real people were wearing and why.
And you do that so well with Billie's mother, or I think you describe her wearing something sparkly.
Yes, Schiaparelli. So Billie has this wonderful mother who's a baroness, but has lost pretty much all of her fortune in the 1930s. She still has an incredible wardrobe full of Schiaparelli gowns, all these 1920s shimmering, beaded and sequined gowns. They look very dated in the 40s, but they're quite spectacular couture. And there's wonderful interactions between Billie and Ella. I just love those two. And Alma, who's Billie's mother's lady's maid, who's stuck with her all this time. The pair of them just are a wonderful couple. And the clothes are so interesting because Ella, Billie's mom, still dresses in her sequin Schiaparelli couture every night for dinner with her hair perfectly done in the Marcel waves and like flawless, and her nails and everything. And that's part of her identity. Doesn't matter that they're selling the grand piano and they're, they had to sell the mansion, and all of this stuff is changed over the decades. That's how she does things. And so she continues. And I think those different generations of women are they tell us something about the time and about the resilience of everyday people and the different approaches. In so many ways, Billie and Ella, her mom, are just like such different generations of women, but they also, they love each other and they support each other, and even if they see things differently.
Yeah, and her wearing her her sparkly outfit is the equal to Billie going out and kicking ass. This is her way of making a stand. Yeah,
that's right.
I will not be ignored. Yeah.
Yeah, I will not be ignored. And also, sure, we may have fallen on hard times, but she's like it's her self-care in a way, a term they wouldn't have used at the time, but it's part of her self-care is to hold on to those aspects of herself and hold her head high. And, Billie learns a lot about life through her mom, even though it's a changed world in the 1940s for her and for women.
And in terms of research, you not only do the research that most of us do, you have gone above and beyond, including getting your private investigator credentials. Is that correct?
That's correct, Fiona. So when my books ever bomb in the future, you can look me up. I'll be in the phone book if you need anything done on the sly.
I need someone taken care of. Yeah.
If you need something taken care of, Fiona, you know who to call. No, I really feel it's important to get to the root of each of the characters' lives and what they know. I'll basically do anything that, isn't going to find me thrown in jail for a story. That's me. So I've got my private investigator credentials. In fact, I needed to do more to get mine than Billie would have in the 40s because it's more regulated than it was at the time. I've been set on fire for research, book research. I've been choked unconscious by Big John McCarthy, the ultimate fighter, for research. Do not try this at home, folks. I beg you, please don't say Tara Moss told me to go out and give this a try. Don't. I wouldn't even do it twice, but I did do that for crime research. I've been to morgues. I've been to the FBI Academy at Quantico. I just saw someone in the chat go, "Why, Tara?" And people ask me that all the time. I get insights about experience from the research. I want to walk the grounds, which I do. In fact, all of the locations in the Ghosts of Paris, and same with the War Widow, they're locations you could go to. They might be they might be falling apart. Maybe they're not safe to go onto the 6th floor anymore, but those buildings exist. The tiles are as I described them. I could do the Billie Walker tour of Paris, the Billie Walker tour of Sydney, because I get more when I'm closer to the story, and that includes the experiences that the characters endure as well. There's a scene in the Paris morgue, actually, in The Ghosts of Paris, which is inspired, if you will, by my real experiences in morgues. So, I just couldn't do that third hand. It has to be, for me, getting up close and personal with the experiences of my characters.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You feel like you're there. I mean, you smell it, you feel it, you feel if you're walking through puddles, you place us right in the moment. It's very cinematic. I have to say.
Oh, thank you. That's what I hope for. We all have our own way of writing, and we're never quite. I don't know what it's like for you, but I'm never quite sure how it will land until it's out in the public, and it always fills me with joy when I hear things like that. The feeling that you're right there is exactly what I want you to experience as the reader.
Well, what would you say was your biggest challenge in writing this book? What was the toughest part, or in general, in terms of writing a book? Is it, the first draft? What is the toughest obstacle for you?
The pandemic, actually, it's a boring answer, but the pandemic was probably the toughest part of writing The Ghosts of Paris because for over 2 decades, have always gone to the locations fresh while I'm writing. And the pandemic meant that I was actually unable to. Um, for 6 months of 2020, for example, when The War Widow came out and I was writing The Ghosts of Paris, I couldn't leave Australia. I'd got trapped in
Yeah.
Australia and they had closed their borders early in the pandemic. So life can get in the way, and that was the case a little bit with this one. Thankfully, I have spent quite a bit of time in Paris. I imagine that comes through. I'm very comfortable with the locations and the beauty of writing about such incredible milestone locations like Notre Dame, like the catacombs, like these incredible places. Thankfully, there's a lot of documentation of those places and from the period, because of course I could go to Paris now and it won't be quite the same. I mean, Notre Dame, of course, famously, would not be quite the same as it was when Billie was there in The Ghosts of Paris. But I can find photographs from the time, and I've been through it myself many times, and it's familiar to me. So it's a bit of the write what you know, but also write what you want to know. And with the pandemic, it did get a little bit in the way of the latter. I couldn't just show up
Yeah.
and walk different streets. I had to find my way around that.
You'd never know. You would never
Good.
know.
Yeah, I was very lucky with Paris. She's like a character to me, and one I'm very familiar with. So thankfully, I picked the right spot, and it wasn't a completely new place to me at all.
What is your writing process like? Do you do, one draft and it's perfect? Do you do 10? How do you
Oh,
get it
one
on the
draft and it's perfect. Yes, that's what I do. No, nothing like that. For me, I'm a plotter and planner, and then as I'm writing, at some point the characters take over, the plot takes over, and maybe the muse takes the book and runs with it in a different direction. For me, the writing of a novel is always a bit like, it's more like archaeology than paint by numbers. I know it's not like paint by numbers for anyone, but for those of you out there wondering kind of how it looks to me, it's sort of like getting down and digging out and unearthing a story, finding, like, I'm discovering as I'm going. And that's part of the joy and why I'm still doing it after 22 years. I am excited as I'm writing. And there's always those beautiful moments. I wish it was every page of every book or every day of writing, but there's those moments where the scenes just kind of fly off the fingertips and you don't even really know where it's coming from. The words just flow. That's what I live for. That's where the excitement is for me. And the rest of it is, having fallen in love with the characters, I just want to take them on an adventure. I want to take readers on an adventure. So yeah, it's a bit more of a like archaeology to me, I guess. I feel like I'm discovering something, almost like I've already written it or the story's already there and I just have to find it.
Mhm. I like that. Yeah, for me, it's about accessing the movie in my brain that is,
Ah,
so
yes.
once you'll be thinking the day before about, okay, what
Mm,
scene am I doing? How would I do it? And it starts just unspooling in your head. And then it's
yes.
a matter
Oh,
of
I
getting it
love
on the
that.
page. Yeah, it's such
Oh,
a
I
funny,
love that, Fiona. So, yeah, discovering the movie, I like that. So, I mean, I think I write in a sort of cinematic way, and I think
wow.
you do also. So, that's a great metaphor as well. And I like that we both have a sense of discovery when we're writing, like, because the characters are almost like living beings, maybe
Yeah.
not when you first write the first few words, but they do take on a kind of life of their own. And so, it's not like I'm completely at their mercy, but sometimes I have to go back to an early scene and rewrite their dialogue because I'm like, oh, she'd never say that. That's totally wrong, Tara. I've just got to rethink that because now I know her.
Mhm. Right. And we both write fairly resilient women.
Yes. I
And
love
and
that
so
about your work.
so they
Uh,
do
if
tend to, stand
if you
out.
if
Mhm.
you haven't read the Magnolia Palace, please do. This is one of the reasons I was fangirling as we were logging on there because Fiona has written such an incredible, well, series of resilient characters, but the way you write women, I just love that. And I love that in historical fiction in particular, because we just haven't had enough of a reflection of those women from the time, have we? It's
Yeah.
seems to me that post 1990s, it became a little bit more possible to have women who were at the center of the action, but they were still there in the, in the 20s, in the 30s, in the 40s. They existed. We just haven't told their stories, and that's why it's such a pleasure to write historical and to write these incredible women.
And what I'm kind of jealous about what you get to do is you get to carry one woman through several
Mm,
books. And so I'm
mm,
curious, what's next? Are you working on something
yes.
now? Do you talk about it? Would you rather not?
I'm actually very excited because I just signed another two-book deal for two
Yes.
more Billie Walker novels, and it's exciting for me because that means the readers have supported this character, and it's giving me the opportunity to continue to be in Billie Walker's world. And that's, publishers are giving that support, and the readers, it wouldn't be possible without them. So I'm thrilled that Billie Walker is finding her audience. I hope that that continues. I'm writing the third book in the series right now. I won't tell you the working title because who knows what it will be in the end. But I love being in her world. There are so many aspects of her professional and personal world yet to be explored. And I hope you sense that when you're reading this, that there's,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there's the satisfaction of those resolutions that happen, but there's always other stuff. And that's life.
Mhm.
Everything doesn't get tied up in a neat bow every time. So there's a lot more to explore. And yeah, I just love it, living in her world. And I plan to write each book 1 year later or in the following year. So you'll see 1948 coming up, coming alive in the third Billie Walker installment.
Yes, I'm very intrigued about a certain relationship, which I won't, no spoilers, but I'm so intrigued with
Okay.
what's going to happen. It's very
Okay. I love hearing that. It's funny because I often will hear from readers about which relationship they're, because
Mhm.
Billy's like she's pulled them in with her tractor beam of, she's quite magnetic.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of pretty dreamy, I think that, yeah, Sam's pretty dreamy, and
Yeah.
Hank is excellent as well. So anyway, I won't give too much away, but I hear about them a lot. What are
Yeah.
you going to do with,
Yes. Because we're
part of fun?
invested. We're so invested. And so did you always want to be a writer? Was that basically your dream as a kid?
It's amusing to talk about now, but when I was 10, I was writing Stephen King style knockoffs for my classmates at Torquay Elementary School. My father, who is in the room just over there,
My dad.
being a wonderful support as he's always been, he found the loose leaf binder with the lined paper of 10-year-old Tara Moss writing these, hilariously young stories that they were thrillers. I mean, they were almost like downright inappropriate for a 10-year-old to be writing, but that would be me. And I was writing these with my classmates written in because they would ask for a chapter featuring themselves. People love to be written into fiction, and that was my first audience as a 10-year-old, were my classmates at school. So I have always wanted to write. I have always enjoyed the taboo stuff, the action sequences, and the things that are taboo are the things that give a real spark for me in the stories. And that was with me at a very young age. I'm sure I was writing before then, but I have like physical proof of
Yeah.
my writing. I think at one point there was one called Black and White Doom. Doom was like a word, like it was the 1980s. Doom
Yeah.
was, it was a cool word. Not
Yeah.
so much. Anyway, but it was cool when I was 10. And Black and White Doom had this scene where I talked about a dismantled hand. I meant dismembered, but I didn't know the difference because I was 10. So it was pretty grisly stuff and very much Stephen King inspired. So that was a big taboo, the fact that I was, reading these books, and those movies were really big at the time. So I don't write horror now, but that interest in storytelling, that interest in kind of putting a chill up people's spine or hooking them and making it so you just have to go on that adventure. That's been with me since.
Yeah, it was destiny, definitely. And, and we share an editor, I have to say, so I'm sure she's very interested in these early stories. We might do a short
Oh
story
my
compilation.
Oh, could you imagine me reading that out
Black and
now?
white doom.
Oh, black and white doom. It shall never be seen by other eyes. But it's funny, and it took me till I was it 23? So that was me as a 10-year-old, always wanting to be an author. But really, it took me till I was 23 to come out of my shell and be confident enough to show people my work again.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the pressures of being a teenager and being afraid of what people will think and being worried about being rejected or having your work laughed at. When I was 10, it was all, the freedom and creativity of being a child. I just didn't see any boundaries. And also the fact that I was writing Stephen King style stuff. It was just exciting.
Yeah.
I didn't overthink it. But then as a teenager, I was like, ooh, what are people going to think? So it took till I was in my 20s for me to really revisit my dream to be an author. And I'm never turning back.
You got to it earlier than most of us, so well done. And I just want to, we have time for maybe one more question. You're a real advocate for people with disabilities, and I wonder if you could if you'd be interested in talking a little bit about that, because it's very powerful what you do. If anyone should follow you on social media, because it's just fascinating the way you talk about it and incorporate what you're dealing with into your own life.
Oh, thanks, Fiona. Well, I am one of very many people who are disabled. So it's between 17 and 26% of the world's population, depending on where you are and how they measure it. And really, stories with disabled characters are fewer and far between. And there are also stories that tend to be quite, there's tropes and stereotypes about those groups of people. I have something called complex regional pain syndrome that resulted from a hip injury 6 years ago. That completely changed my world. So they call it an ambulatory wheelchair user. So often I use a wheelchair. Some days I use a walking stick. And I started an account called Tara and Wolfie that you can find on Instagram, named for Wolfie, my first cane that I decided okay, I'm going to get measured for a proper walking stick. And that's Wolfie. I've still got Wolfie with this wonderful, fierce wolf head. She gets lots of compliments. And being visible and being disabled and talking about it, I think is really valuable because we're out in the community. Every community has a lot of people with disabilities and chronic illness and chronic pain. Mine's primarily a pain condition. And, we're out there, but it tends not to get talked about. And I think the stigma and the taboos are not healthy. They're not doing anyone any favors. So just being visible, talking about it, destigmatizing, I think is really rewarding. And the many disability advocates out there who have paved the way to where we are now have my respect and admiration, and I've learned a lot from them.
You are just so accomplished in so many ways. It's just such a pleasure to talk to you about books and life. I really, thank you so much. I raced through your books and just am absolutely in awe. So I'm very excited we can share
thanks, Fiona.
your work with everybody here today.
Thank you.
And Allie, do you want to open it up to a Q&A?
Hello, I'm back. I would love to do a Q&A real quick. So audience members, I'm seeing lots of questions, but if you have any more, now is the time. Go ahead and throw them in that Q&A box. We're going to get to as many as we can. If we don't get to yours, I apologize in advance.
I see a lucky 13 in there right now. So that's
far
quite a few.
So this is a very related question from an anonymous attendee to what we were just talking about. It says, can you talk a little bit about why it was important for you to include stories about people who would normally be left out of history in this time period, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, etc., in this new book?
Oh, thanks for that question. I love that. The reason is that, they exist. The story is made exponentially more interesting by including the people that exist in the world that we're in. I mean, I've been in human rights advocacy for about 20 years, and now since my own disability, obviously, I'm doing more disability advocacy. But that's not really what this is about. It's about, as an author, telling the best possible story. And I think that we have seen very narrow focus on particular types of characters. Again, I mentioned how much I love film noir and I love hard-boiled, but women did not come up well in those stories. People who were disabled were pretty much invisible, or if they were there, they weren't treated very well or given a lot of, screen time. And it just doesn't make for as good a story. If you include the people who are out there, you just get a much more interesting look at the world around us. So I think we actually make it, we make our lives less by excluding people, and including people is an absolute pleasure as an author and just makes the stories a lot more interesting. And if we're looking at the 1940s, and again, there are LGBT, I wanted to say queer characters in this. There's LGBTIQ characters in The Ghosts of Paris, for example, and you can't write about this period without mentioning that what was happening to that community at the time. You can't write, The War Widow without mentioning what was happening to the Jewish characters at the time, the Aboriginal people in Australia at the time. So I can't touch on human rights issues without noticing this stuff. And it makes for a better story. And the characters are just amazing and resilient and so much more interesting.
I love that answer. Thank you for sharing. So this is on a new track, but Christine asks, do either of you have any input on your book covers? They are gorgeous.
Ooh, always. As I mentioned, it's Ida von Munster. She's incredible. You can find her on Instagram. I wanted to have her as Billie because she just makes a wonderful Billie Walker. I did have some excellent conversations with Dutton Books and also with HarperCollins in Canada and Australia, who are also supporting the book and publishing it. And there was my dream team of people. So yeah, we got I believe the vintage details right. Billie's even wearing a new look style coat, and that Dior collection came out in early 47, so it's perfectly timed. And Billie, of course, would be across it. So absolutely. Feedback on the covers and that relationship with the publishers, I think, is so important to represent the work the best way you can. What about you, Fiona?
Yeah, the team at Dutton is just terrific. Christopher Lynn is the art director there, and every year he just comes up with a terrific cover. Magnolia Palace, it's kind of back there, is just gorgeous, where they did a kind of the Frick building, which is where it's set, and then these magnolias that are kind of draped around the image. And I just thought they did such a good job, and it feels fresh. Historical fiction, I think, can feel kind of tired after a while if you just have a black and white photo and a woman in color looking back, right? That's the standard one. And so for them to kind of shake things up a little is just great. I trust them completely.
Well, what I love as well is that Dutton has embraced an image where she looks like a woman of action. Again, that's the relationship and the understanding of the work, but the fact that they're seeing that and going, yes, she feels like she's observing the world and she's about to do something. Because you're right, a lot of those vintage style images capturing the period will be women looking wistfully off, holding old suitcases, kind of looking out a window and stuff. And I'm like, that's not Billie. She would be climbing out of the window, or she, doing something else like that. So the fact that she looks like she's, she's got that squint, she's got the arched eyebrow. Those are important elements of the character, and they've captured it beautifully. I just love what they've done.
Okay, so I have a semi-related question from an anonymous attendee that says, did your own love of vintage fashion come from your novel research, or have you always been interested in vintage clothing?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know which came first. I think my love of vintage predates writing the series because I was obsessed with history and historical objects. I like to surround myself with old stuff. I'm just that I'm like, oh, I've got to adopt the old thing at the back of this shop, the secondhand shop, that dusty thing in the corner. I'm like, oh, I need to have it and look after it and care for it and put it on my wall. So I'm one of those people. In fact, I've got a couple of things here I wanted to show you. This is a handmade bracelet made by a soldier, and he's made it using coins and put his love's name on it and sent it back. Somewhere through history, it ended up in a secondhand shop and lost the family line. Unfortunately, I can't track down the people, but I'm just remembering it, looking at it, airing it. I think is really important because there was a lot of love put into that. And here's a Billie Walker cigarette case. She would absolutely have her Lucky Strikes in there. This just beautiful, part compact, part cigarette. That's like exactly what she needs. So these objects to me are a connection point to the past. It helps to create those threads. And in terms of my threads, yes, I like to wear vintage as well because I feel like I'm immersing myself in the time and kind of respecting the effort that was taken to keep those things alive, to keep giving them life and to admire the workmanship. For example, you could see a 1940s evening dress that involved a panel that would have come from the 1920s from another dress, and they've changed the dress and they've used that bit of silk or beading to give it a new life. When you can detect that in the clothing, you're just getting a really great insight into history. So I am obsessed. I'm obsessed. Listen to me nerding out. I'm obsessed. And that was certainly there before the first Billie book landed and came naturally with the territory.
Oh, those pieces are incredible. We have some comments in chat about the bracelet.
Isn't it amazing? Just think of being out there in the field and making this to send back to your love, and how long it would have taken to leave where you were in conflict and make it home to her. So beautiful.
It's amazing. So this is a slight change of gears. And if I mispronounce your name, my apologies. But this is from Anissa. For both authors, which character of yours are you most like, and which character has been the hardest to write, and why?
I think Fiona, you should go first.
Yeah, sure. The hardest to write was Henry Clay Frick in the Magnolia Palace, because he was a real person, and he was a very controversial, rather ruthless man. Yet I needed to capture his humanity and kind of get inside his head so that he wasn't just this cardboard villain. And the way I did that was imagining that he was Anthony Hopkins. And so, because he had very blue eyes, as Anthony Hopkins does as well. And by doing that, I was able to, stay true to the facts of what he did, but just hopefully show his vulnerabilities as well. So that's the way I attack that. How about you, Tara?
Do you have a bulletin board and put up pictures? You do like little storyboards? Okay, yeah, I do that as well, especially early in a character when I'm kind of trying to decide who they are. There's this one English character who, it's not Jack Rake, but another one that comes up. And he's not a major character, but I was just like trying to figure out what he looks like. And I found this particular image of Hugh Grant with the fluffy hair, and he was wearing a suit. And I was like, it's not Hugh Grant, but it's that picture of Hugh Grant. That's just, it gave me an essence, and it gave me enough to springboard off to kind of form who he was. For me, the hardest characters, I think when you do have the responsibility of real life characters and people, those are the hardest. Like I feel such responsibility to get that right. In fact, the only location in the series so far that doesn't exist is the Dancers, which is a nod to Philip Marlowe's Los Angeles in the 40s. But I wrote it that way because there's some nefarious types who keep showing up there, and I didn't want to offend anyone's family who'd be like, wait a second, my great grandfather owned that club in the 40s. What are you casting aspersions about what kind of person he was or what kind of place he was running? So trying to be careful with real people in history is a big responsibility. Mostly, I try to steer clear, and I will give those mentions of the incredible women like Lillian Armfield, for example, and a policewoman in Australia that we hear from in The War Widow, and those mentions of like Martha Gellhorn or Lee Miller and stuff like that, without having them as a central character. I'm not yet ready to kind of write a book that is actually Virginia Hall, but I'll sort of tip off readers to her, and they should do a little Google and go, wow,
Yes.
what an amazing woman. She actually was, she was a spy in World War II. If you don't know about Virginia Hall, she was turned down initially by the Americans because she was disabled. She had a hunting accident, which meant that part of her leg was missing, and she had a prosthetic wooden leg called Cuthbert. So this is a woman you need to look up. She's amazing, and I think now just starting to get recognition for what she did during World War II. And yeah, there's little gems like that in The Ghosts of Paris. You just need to kind of go, it sounds like she's dropped a name there, and go and check it out and find out more.
I love that. So we are getting to the end of our evening. I'm going to do maybe one or two more questions. So Stephanie says, do you have Billie's future story mapped and plotted already? That is where it will lead in the next two books, or will her story unfold as you write it?
It's a combination of both. My experience over the last 20 odd years has been that I will plot and plan, and then the characters will take on their own lives and they will tell me what they're doing and sometimes surprise me. So I have to remain flexible and adaptable because Billie will require me to. And yes, I have a lot of things in mind for Billie, and I'm sure she'll do most of them, but she'll probably shock me along the way also. She'll probably end up killing someone I wasn't expecting, or vice versa, and they'll be like, now what do I do? So yeah, she's that kind of character. She keeps me on my toes for sure.
Oh, I love that. All right. So we're about at time. So I'm going to use this last minute to ask, where should we be looking for the next thing that you can discuss? Of course, no, don't spill secrets if you're not allowed. But what is the next thing, and where can we find it? For both
the
of you.
next thing. Okay, Fiona, you should go first.
Yeah, the next thing, there's a short story coming out on Audible and Amazon in July that's set at Carnegie Hall. That's part of an anthology of historical fiction writers, which I'm very excited about. And then the next book that I'm writing is set at Radio City Music Hall, and that'll be out sometime next year. I'm working hard on it right now.
I love that.
So exciting.
I've got a short story coming out in a Cornell Woolrich anthology, a tribute anthology to that amazing noir writer. It's called Black is the Night, is the name of the anthology. I believe it comes out in October. Neil Gaiman has written the foreword. There are amazing writers involved, and I've written a piece in that which is a take on the story that inspired Rear Window, the famous Alfred Hitchcock film based on a Cornell Woolrich story. So I hope you enjoy that. I am writing Billie Walker novel number 3, and now I know I have the go ahead to do number 4 as well. So I am fully immersed in Billie's world, and of course, continuing to do my advocacy work. So find me online. I'm at Tara Moss Author, or on Twitter at Tara_Moss. There's some poor woman who's Tara Moss, who's like, I think she's in Oregon, and she just gets she gets so many tweets about me. She would be so sick of me. So yeah, it's Tara_Moss on Twitter and Tara Moss Author elsewhere. And I look forward to hearing from you. Always happy to chat online. And maybe what I'll do as well is post some pictures of some of the real life locations in The Ghosts of Paris and The War Widow, so you can check those out.
And congratulations on a wonderful, wonderful book.
Oh, thank you, Fiona. Such a pleasure to chat tonight. And thank you, Third Place Books and Dutton, for your support. And Fiona, still fangirling over here. Can't wait for your next book.
We have to meet in person one of these days. No more.
We do.
All right.
That's right. A champagne cocktail in person.
Yes, in Paris. All right, we're done.
Well, it is about that time. So this has been such a wonderful event. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Audience members, for those of you who have not gotten copies of the books this evening, I'm going to go ahead and link them one more time so they're easy to find in chat. Go ahead and follow those links to both The Ghost of Paris and The Magnolia Palace. As always, let us know what you thought of this event in person or on social media. We love, love, love hearing from you always. Tara and Fiona, huge thank you for being here this evening. This has been an absolute delight. Do you have any last things you'd like to share before we do the awkward waving thing?
Just thank you. Thank you and enjoy the ride. Billie does drive fast, so buckle up.
That's right. That's right. Enjoy the ride. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Allie.
My absolute pleasure. All right, everyone. So here we go. The awkward waving shall commence.